Podcast.
Have you ever had writer's block? Some of you out there are traditional writers, some of you songwriters. Have you ever had the writer's block? I've had the writer's block. I'm having something of a writer's block right now, actually. More of, we'll call it a podcaster block. We could call it a creator block, a creative block, an artist block. And I've been struggling with this for a little while now, kids, if I'm perfectly honest. It's confession time. It's confession corner here on the John Huff Podcast. I've just been having a writer's block of sorts. Now, this is not to be compared with writer's blocks that I had when I was actually writing. 15, 20 years ago, if you know the story, I was wrapped up in becoming a fiction writer, and that went smoothly a lot of the time. But then there would be other times when it just would not come. It just would not happen. I could not get engaged in a story. I couldn't make the words come out. And I would ping pong all over the place. I would write some pages of a thing, and then I would be like, I hate this thing. It's terrible. Let me write this other thing. And then I would ping pong over to another thing. And then I would write 3 or 4 pages or 100 of that. And that would fall apart. And then I would ping pong to the next thing. And it was kind of this manic scramble of trying to dig my claws into some piece of creative work that was actually going to flow for me. What I have learned is that you cannot manufacture flow. Okay? This I learned the very, very hard way. And so back when I was a younger man, less experienced, I would begin to panic, right? So I would be struggling to find my way into a story or a piece of writing, and then this panic would arise. And I think the panic comes from a general belief that you're not good enough, all right? This is one of the things that gets you as a creative person. I think for most of us, and I'm even uncomfortable saying us in this case, like roping myself in as a creative person, very uncomfortable for me, points to some psychological stuff that I still have not yet overcome. But I think a lot of people who are artists have a certain vulnerability about their art and about their work, and a certain imposter syndrome, which I have talked about on this podcast at length in previous episodes. And so you find yourself in this position where the work is not coming, the art is not coming, the songs are not coming. And if you are of a certain temperament, what immediately jumps in on you is the voice telling you that in fact you're not good enough, and that whatever you've produced in the past has been an accident and a fluke. And if you're not very guarded about your internal dialogue, if you're not hip to it, it can very quickly swamp you, all right? And so you get pulled down into the feelings that are associated with the words that go through your head, right? So if you've got this belief in you that you're not good enough, that you're an imposter, that what you've created in the past has been a fluke, those beliefs come with very powerful and articulate language that will fill your head and will just point to the fact that you're not producing right now as evidence. And it's so funny how much weight we attach to negative evidence as opposed to positive evidence. What I mean is, you have produced things in the past and they have been good and you have been happy with them, but you don't seem to default to, I've done this in the past and it was really good, I'll do it again. You default to, I'm not working right now, I'm not good enough, and what I've done in the past has been in some way a fluke. And if you are a young artist or a new or not all that experienced artist, it can be very, very easy to fall into that trap. I have fallen into that trap myself, and I have spent weeks, months probably at times, just depressed, just kicking myself, just being frustrated by the lack of artistic output. And I'll tell you a little secret, kids, all of you new artists out there. If you are in that headspace, you will not produce art. All right, there is a time to grind. There is a time to sit your butt in the chair and kind of dare the muse to appear to you. Read Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. There's also a time to recognize that maybe the well is just dry. And this happens, especially if you come to the end of a long project, writing an album, let's say, or recording an album, or writing a book, or a collection of poems, or a series of paintings, or whatever it is you do. If you've come to the end, for example, of a renovation, which I did last summer, we were just starting it about this time last summer, you become very, very, very weary by the end of a renovation, for example. And so you get to the end of doing what we did here. The last thing you want to do is embark on another renovation. This is a cycle, right? You have the inspiration at one point. You exhaust and express the inspiration, hopefully into something that you're pleased with, something that's completed, and then you've got to recharge the battery. That's a reason why the NFL season ends in February, doesn't start again on March 1st. It starts again in friggin' October, September, whatever. There needs to be a period of recovery, a period of renewal. The only place where it's psychotic is the world of football. I mean, real football, soccer. Premier League season ends in May, and then it starts again in August. There's a couple of months off, but that's only in theory. There is no time off because, as you'll see right now, those players from the Premier League, maybe a couple of weeks, and they're immediately into training and preparation for the European Championships, which begin this week, kids, and I am stoked about that. It's like there's no break at all. And even if there's not an international tournament, there are international friendlies. And then if you're a team like Arsenal with a massive global audience, summertime, you're off playing friendlies against other big clubs in markets like Los Angeles or in Australia or in China. There is no break. And that's the reason why soccer players break down, kids. There is no break. That's an aside, but it's a relevant aside because what did I just say? That's why soccer players break down, because they take no break. If you are playing at a certain level where you're part of your international team or the club side you play for is in enough demand to be traveling around the world marketing the club by playing friendlies. If you're playing at the very highest level, you don't get a break. And eventually, it destroys your freaking body. Well, so it is as a creative. So it is as an artist. You grind yourself to a powder producing your stuff. Even if it flows, I talked about flow recently and how the art should come easily. And it should, but it is a physically and mentally still demanding thing. And one of the things we get as creators, especially in this on-demand creative kind of world we live in, is this enormous guilt you feel if you're not creating. A couple weeks ago, I talked about how you get into this enormous guilt if you're creating and it's coming too easily. There's the other side of this, which is you get into this feeling of guilt and shame if you're not creating. We do not, in this culture, prioritize the creative break. And the creative break is so necessary. The Pause. The Pause. That's the German word for taking a break. A pause. A Pause. It's so interesting how we have it drilled into our head to be constantly productive all the time. Especially in the social media world where if you don't appear for a week or two, it's all over, man. You've already blown all of your cred. And that's a myth, all right? That is a myth that has been created by probably Big Social to keep you on the dang platform producing that content for free that they can exploit for millions and millions and millions of dollars. Also an aside. What I'm saying is sometimes The writer's block, sometimes the painter's block, the creator's block, the podcaster block, is telling you that you need to take a little break. And that's where I'm at these days, okay? Back in the writing days, if I was encountering a writer's block, it usually meant one of two things. It meant maybe one of three things. A, as I said, the well is just run dry. Sometimes that happens, you know? We are not a spigot. We are not a tap. Sometimes you've just exhausted the thing you're doing, or you have exhausted the creative impulse, or your mind, your body, it's telling you that you need to step back, look after yourself, rest, do fun things, get yourself into the right headspace so that the next project can begin to form. All right? It's kind of like a flower. It's like a flower, kids, or a seed or a plant or the tulips that I planted last fall. All right? Those are in the ground all winter, incubating, right? They are in the soil preparing. And you don't see any of that work. What you see is in the springtime, when the sun is warm and when the time is right, nature does that miracle that it does. And suddenly, a little green shoot appears. The little green shoot didn't appear, wasn't formed, wasn't created overnight. It was created through months of preparation, of storing that energy, of putting the pieces in place. And then when the climate, quite literally, when the climate is right, the green shoot appears. Now, plants are smarter and wiser and more patient than we are. Plants, trees, whatever, recognize the value of that incubation period. And they understand that they are, in fact, working when it would appear that they're not working. They're not dormant. They are gathering up the energy. They are storing the energy. They are preparing to direct the energy into their creative work, which is making that flower, which is making those leaves. Can we all just do a little kumbaya here? Trees don't get antsy and anxious and nervous about the fallow period. They create their work, which is all those leaves, and they are magnificent in their creation for a few months. And then there is the magnificent coming down of the curtain, that spectacular blast of color. And then they release the work, and the leaves fall, and the tree goes back into that dormant period of time, not being lazy, not fearing that their productivity is over and the game is done, just prepping themselves. And over time, traditional artists begin to understand this. Your writers, your musicians, you go on tour and then you come off tour. And you do another album next year. I mean, that's how the cycle used to be. An album every year, every couple of years. You go out and tour the thing for a year, and then you come home and you just relax. And you separate from your bandmates that you've been in such close contact with for the last 4, 5, 6, 8 months that you want to freaking strangle them all unless you've reached a level where you can have separate buses. You need that away time. That refractory period, if I can work that blue on a hot Monday morning. And it seems like, you've got to learn that the hard way sometimes, but eventually you do. And in every industry, for the most part, there is this recognized time of just recovery. And it's factored in, it's part of the game, and we accept that. You may personally, as an artist, feel the pressure all the time. And yeah, there have been times in the past when record labels would really be squeezing an artist. Like, we did really great on that last album. We got to bang out another one immediately and get you back out on the road. And eventually, a band that's in that position will run into problems. There will be exhaustion. There will be infighting. There will probably be a hefty dose of pharmaceuticals to help you just cope with all of that pressure. This is the other thing, right? One of the things I said, there are probably 3 factors in a writer's block. There is the well having run dry, which is a natural product of having expressed. There's also a pressure. right? And I felt this before. Sometimes if you've had a really great success, you actually published a novel and it did well. Now they're looking for the sophomore album. Is there going to be a sophomore slump? And that brings with it an enormous level of pressure. And that can just seize you up, right? That's an ego thing right off the bat. Oh man, I have to do something better or do something impressive. And the funny thing is, what you did in the first place was probably the product of flow, was probably the product of the art coming through you. It was it was a natural expression, and therefore it worked. Then you begin to try to manufacture the second one to meet the expectations, and the manufacturing sends you down dead ends and creates this real frustration. And again, you cannot create the good stuff in that feeling of frustration, in that mindset, but you add the pressure to it. That will cook you as a creative, right? The other side of that is if you have just finished a project and maybe it's good, maybe it isn't, but it doesn't get picked up or it doesn't go anywhere, and you feel you put upon yourself a pressure to create something that will go somewhere and will do well. And anytime pressure is applied, for the most part, you run into problems, okay? Unless you're one of those people, a lot of journalists are like this, who can work really well on a deadline. And a lot of writers, I think, benefit from having that deadline too, all right? It adds a certain type of pressure, but this pressure to do really well, or this pressure to follow up something, or this pressure to do something better than what didn't work before, you run into this pressure and it will get to you. And it's got to be that way for bands whose record labels are telling them, even though they need a break, to bang out another one. There's a story in the King's X oral history. I'm going to muck up the details. I'm flying utterly by the seat of my pants here today, kids, if that isn't already evident. There's a story where I think King's X was on, I don't know if they were on Gretchen or if they were on Faith Hope Love, but it was at this stage of their career where they were still really just on the cusp, right? Just on the cusp of perhaps actually breaking. They had all this critical acclaim. They had 2-3 records out that were universally loved by musicians. They were on MTV. They were beginning. This was back in the label days when a band could build a momentum. The label would say, we'll give you 3 or 4 records to build this thing, not 3 or 4 minutes, aka one single. And it was beginning to happen, and they were on the road constantly. I think they had done like this whole run with AC/DC where they've had to face those hostile crowds every night and win them over, and how mentally and physically exhausting that was, even though it's great to be playing at that level, to be playing at that level against night after night of relentless hostility. Very, very difficult. And then they had been out with maybe Living Colour, and they've been on all these tours, right? They had a record. They had some stuff spinning on MTV. It's like, you got to strike while the iron is hot, and that's understood. But they also, in the case of Ty and I think Jerry, had young kids and wives, and there was these two sides of life. There was the musician side and there was the family side. And the musician side at that point in time and at that level demanded so much of them that they were missing family. I mean, they got babies and they're missing the first year, the first 2 years of their kid's life. And this enormous guilt and longing and shame and all of this stuff. And they come off, I think they'd been on the road for the better part of 2 years, probably promoting whichever album it was. And then they get back in and they've come to the end of whatever tour it was. And then they get a call from management that says, hey, we got X number of months with the Black Crowes, get back on the bus and go. And they just put their foot down and they said, and this is Black Crowes like 1990. This was peak Black Crowes, big tour. And they just said, I haven't seen my kid in a year. I missed everything. I'm exhausted. I've been out on the road for years here. I'm not going out. And if you tell me I have to go out, I'm quitting the band. And it came to this head. And even management was like, oh, boo-hoo, oh, poor you. You have to go out and play for a whole bunch of people every week. And they're like, you're totally missing the point, Jack. I'm missing my life. I'm missing my family. I need a break from this. I need to step away. And it caused quite a lot of consternation. And it's like you look around, it's like we're finally kind of half-assed making it. And this is what it is. Like this constant barrage of pressure, right? How did I get onto King's X? This is the problem with flying by the seat of your pants. The point is, every industry recognizes that even every artistic kind of envelope, every area of the biz recognizes that you need to take a break in order to revive and refill your cup as a creator. Even television, for crying out loud. That's why we have season finales, kids, and we'll see you again in 5 months. We got to recharge the writers. We have to write new stuff. We have to recharge the actors. We know that in summertime, nobody's watching, so we take a break. Every creative industry has understood this, except the podcast industry. Not to say that there aren't podcasts that do seasons. There's a lot more of that now as podcasting is getting into storytelling and fiction, kind of audio plays, that sort of thing. But your run-of-the-mill average voice like mine podcast, the tradition now, the industry has been set up such that you do an episode every frigging week ad infinitum. And that works if you are a very focused program, if you occupy a certain niche, that tends to work, although you can very easily exhaust a niche. And then you find that you've said everything there is to say about that niche. And now what? And doesn't a creative block set in because you're kind of stuck there with nothing left to say? But it can also work if you are very topical, if you are doing something that's in the news world, for example. Well, there's something every freaking day you can talk about on a news-related podcast. There's more than enough. Or if you are in the sports world, or if you cover Arsenal and that's your podcast, and there's always something to be talked about, and so the content is there. For the rest of us who do something somewhat different from that, especially those of us who have decided to be mostly a single voice podcast, you're going to eventually run into this problem of, what am I going to talk about this week? If you are an interview show, well, you've got a backlog of interviews and you just keep going after the interviews and doing it. But even after a while, that can burn you out. It's really, really demanding. Tell you a secret, kids, it's really demanding to run an interview podcast, especially as a solo shop. You know, you're out there trying to find people to have on your show and then making connections with those people and then trying to schedule those people, which can be a friggin' nightmare. And then you're doing all of this prep for the episode. Then if you're lucky, you're recording the episode, which is very, very draining in terms of your energy. But a significant portion of the time, you're not even going to get to that interview because the person's going to bail on you or flake on you or want to reschedule. And then you've got to go through this process and then you're juggling that. Then you're trying to edit together and publish the stuff that you've got in the can. It's like, it's a very demanding thing to run an interview podcast. But if you're doing it and it's working, there's always content ready to go. If you're a solo shop like mine, especially a solo shop like mine, which is everything is me. Okay, if I'm just doing the recording and then I'm handing it off to a producer and then somebody's handling the social media and somebody's dealing with the millions of messages and requests that I get off the back of this program, then you can take some personal time for yourself and let other people handle the details. I'm not that, all right? I do all of it. I do all of it, from conception of episode to prepping episode to recording to editing to publishing to marketing to handling the millions of requests. And the truth is, almost nobody can sustain that ad infinitum on a week over week over week basis, especially if doing this is not your job. Now, it kind of is, more or less unpaid, my job, in the sense that it takes most of my time and that's what I dedicate it to. But I'm also a working drummer, all right? So I've got that side of my life that has to be accommodated, and I'm a freelance writer. So, and that's where I actually get paid. And that is, I do get paid to play music too, but let's not split hairs here. The point is, I got other stuff that I'm doing in order to sustain my life. Writing, drumming, podcasting. It's all part of the big picture. And that's great. I'm not complaining about any of that. I'm just saying there's only so much bandwidth. There's only so much bandwidth. And the podcasting world hasn't really seemed to have adopted this idea that you can take a friggin' break. And this is an interesting sort of synchronistic moment because it was almost exactly 2 years ago this week. In fact, it was 2 years ago this week that I published my return episode. That was June of 2022. I had ended the podcast, I thought, forever in February of 2022. And at that point in time, I was in a very, very bad headspace. Okay. I was dealing with a depression. I was still dealing with anxiety. I was very frustrated by the way things were going. The podcast was bringing me down. And if you are investing yourself in a project like this and it's not lifting you up, you're running into a problem, kids. And so I was in a very, very dark headspace at that point in time. And what I decided to do was just stop. I just stopped. And I'd like to say that that was a healthy decision. I'd like to say that that was done with some amount of self-compassion and self-care in mind, but it really wasn't. It was just a bitter F you sort of decision. Not F you to the listeners, but F you to everything. Because I was in an F you to everything kind of headspace at that point in time. Not to my credit, but it's all part of the evolution. And so I stopped. I'm like, I'm just not going to do this anymore. You know, nobody's listening. I'm not getting anything fulfilling out of it. And that's it. I'm just going to quit. And I did. And I needed to be honest, at that point in time. I didn't need to quit. I needed to take a break. But the podcast industry doesn't seem to value breaks. And so it tends to be this all or nothing sort of thing, right? You're going to pod fade, you know, just like everybody pod fades in the end. Well, maybe they wouldn't if they would take a friggin' break when they need one. I needed one in February of 2022. I wasn't savvy enough to recognize that, and I was in a very dark headspace, and so I just blew it up. Just blew it up, man. And then almost immediately was like, I know I'm not finished. I know I'm not finished here. And that was a decision that was perhaps a bit hasty. But I did take 4 months away and try to just get my head right, which eventually I did. And then I made the return in June of 2022. Episode 97, Just Like Motley Crue, which was, of course, a reference to Motley Crue signing a blood contract that they were done performing, and then a few years later popping up saying, hey, we're going on the road again. I was like, if Motley Crue can do it, so can I. And from then, June of 2022 until now, June of 2024, it's been 1 week since it's been, apart from a couple of weeks off at Christmas each year, it's been full on. I've pretty much done a podcast every week since June of 2022. That's nigh on 100 episodes. And you look back at it and you go, how on earth did I produce 100 episodes? 100 friggin' hours of content. And it's like, is it any wonder you've reached this point in June of 2024 where you're just a little bit out of gas? And I am just a little bit out of gas, kids, okay? Last few weeks, it's been a real struggle. It's just been a real struggle to come up with things to say. And that brings me to the third leg upon which creative blocks kind of stand. There's being out of gas, there's pressure, and then there's just being in your own head, overthinking. So that happens to me. The past few weeks, it's been a struggle just to come up with stuff that I feel is worth talking about for you, the listener. And then you begin to get in your head about, well, maybe I should do this. Well, maybe I should do that. Well, maybe it really wants to be this. Well, maybe it really wants to be that. And all of a sudden, you're not working from this kind of gut instinct soul place anymore. You're beginning to work from your head. You can't work from your head very well, very effectively as a creator. There is a part in the writing process where your head comes into it, all right? That's in the editing stage of the process. The initial draft, the initial impetus has to come from that mysterious, ethereal place where these things come from. And you have to be able to tap into that and let it flow. When you come to a point where you're trying to create from your head, you usually don't create anything sustainable. You usually don't create anything that works. But I've reached that point. And when I start getting into my head, I start getting very, very existential. And I start comparing myself to other people and what they do, what Blind Boy does on his podcast, what Jackie Schimmel does on the Bitch Bible, what Bill Burr does. And the thing is, what all of those people do enormously successfully is be them. They be, maybe in some cases, an amplified version of them, and I'm being an amplified version of me right now. They have their idiom, all right? They have their delivery, but what they're fundamentally doing is being them. And they do that well because they're them. You get like me and you're struggling for content and you're up in your own head, you begin to tell yourself, well, I need to be like them. I need to be like Dave Roth. I need to be like Blind Boy, and I need to do what he does or what they do. And that's the wrong answer, kids. You know, imitation is not art, right? Throughout history, there are thousands of people who go to the Louvre and copy the paintings there and sell their copies of the paintings for not a shade of a percentage of what the original is worth, all right? Making the copies doesn't get you anywhere. Might get you bread for dinner, and that can be a valuable thing. If you are a creator, you need to create something that's you, something that's original. And I'm still so insecure that when I find I'm struggling for content, I almost immediately go, not looking for inspiration from other people, but looking for what works for them. I put up a poll on the threads last week, and what was the exact language of it? I said, what do you look for in a podcast? And then I gave 4 options: information, inspiration, entertainment, or laughs. And 2/3 of the respondents to that poll said they look for entertainment. And then I take a step back and I go, oh, well, what does that mean? Entertainment. Does that mean that you don't want me to talk about the motivational stuff? And that category didn't get a lot of response at all. So you don't want me to talk about the Tao, and you don't want me to talk about everything I'm talking about on this podcast right now. You want me to be entertaining? You want me to be Schimmel? You want me to be Bill Burr? I don't think I can be those things. I don't think I'm all that entertaining, to be honest. And I'm not all that interested in talking about day-to-day stuff. I think, again, this is just me in my own head again. And I'm uncomfortable with what I'm talking about at this moment. Like, I'm very uncomfortable talking about me. I don't want to talk about me. I mean, when it comes to the mental health stuff, when it comes to the creative stuff, I can really only speak from my own experience, and that's okay. But a podcast where I just get up here and talk about my day-to-day life, that's not a podcast, because there's almost nothing to be talked about in my day-to-day life. But it kind of leaves me it just adds to this disconnect. What a creative block is a disconnect. It's a disconnect from what I've talked about before, this flow, this thing that you uniquely can tap into. But it's not you. You allow it through you, right? And so you get into your head, you begin to break that conduit. Which is kind of where I'm at right now. And then you go looking for, well, what do people actually want? And a lot of times, this is an aside. I understand I'm going in circles here, and I apologize for that, as long as we're not circling the drain. A lot of times when you go looking, you do a poll that says, what are you looking for in a podcast? What you're actually looking for is not the answer, but permission. A lot of time what you're looking for permission to do something that you think maybe it's not okay to do, right? Like maybe I actually do want to be an entertainment podcast. Entertaining in the sense that I just come on here and be goofy and you guys laugh, and there's not much in it that's actually edifying or useful, but you get an hour of escapism. I don't think I'm great at that, but maybe there's part of me that wants to do that. Maybe there's part of me that is struggling to come up with content right now because I'm not really experiencing or uncovering these kinds of pearls of wisdom that have been the basis of some of my previous episodes. And maybe part of me wants to just be a goofball on here for an hour and feels as though I can't because A, maybe I'm not very good at that, and B, maybe that's a disservice to you because I feel like I want these episodes to bring some value to you beyond just escapism. And again, that's my own insecurity speaking because I put up a poll that says, do you want to be entertained? And that's 2/3 of what people want. And then I recognize that, well, yeah, when I listen to Roth, when I listen to Schimmel, when I listen to some of these other people, I'm not really taking away pearls of wisdom from a lot of that stuff. Blind boy, you are. But the others, you're not really. You're just feeling better about life after having listened to an entertaining person for an hour. And I feel as though I'm not capable of that, not qualified for that. It feels very egoic and arrogant of me to think you folks out there would want to listen to me prattle on about day-to-day stuff and try to be funny. It just, for me, it creates a kind of dissonance. There's stuff I could talk about. I saw the Pixies last weekend. Wow, right? And you think, well, there's an episode. I'll tell everybody about going to Toronto and seeing the Pixies for the first time. And you know what? It's a really good show, and it was cool to see them. And the Pixies are an enormously influential band, and it was really fun to watch a band at such a veteran level operate and how they did that. And I don't want to do an episode on that. I'm going to talk about going to see the Pixies just for the sake of talking about going to see the Pixies. It's like I have this dissonance about feeling as though the particulars of my day-to-day life are in some way worth hearing about for you out there. People are doing really, really interesting stuff. We should probably be listening to them. And so I feel like if I'm going to do a podcast, I want it to offer you something more than just here's what I did last weekend. I could do that in 2 seconds on Instagram. Again, this is all evidence of overthinking, all right? This is not me tapping into my instincts or my intuition. This is me in my head trying to write to the market and realizing I probably don't write to what it seems the market wants. And so the story goes around and around and around and around and around. And what I have learned as a writer, what I've learned as a musician, is that when you're going around and around and around and around, the thing to do is get quiet. The thing to do is get quiet. You're churning. I've done episodes about churning too. And this is the point. All this stuff I'm going through, I've talked about it at length. It doesn't need to be talked about again. And then, well, what are you left with? I saw the Pixies last weekend and it was cool. Thank you for listening. Sign up to my Patreon. This is not me complaining. This is not me being upset. I'm just trying to give a picture of where we're at here. And all you can do is get quiet. The thing to do when you are churning is to get quiet, especially creatively, because you are no longer tapped into your intuition. You are no longer tapped into your creative conduit. You are plugged into your head. Your head is great at ping-ponging, looking for the answer, and it almost never comes to you or is found that way. And so the thing to do is get quiet. Get quiet and let that creative voice that still exists with you, that still small voice, kids, get quiet enough to be able to hear it again and then relearn how to trust it. This is all, the creative process is such a challenge, man. And I know some of you are out there thinking, you think this is creative? Maybe, maybe not. What I do know is that it's just really demanding. It can be really, really difficult. And if you treat it the wrong way, as I have in the past, and if you allow yourself to become anxious and depressed and pressurized and to begin to ping pong all over the place, A, you don't fix it. B, it gets worse. That stuff just amplifies itself. And you wind up in just this really awful place. And as a writer, I've been in that really awful place. And I don't want to be there again. And so what I learned is, here's what you do. You're having a creative block. Feels like it's a heavy one. Step away. You just step away and you get quiet and you are not losing time. All right. That's the other thing. You feel like, oh man, I'm wasting this time. This time that I'm step away, I'm wasting the creative opportunity, but you're not. You're actually speeding it up, because if you continue to sit there to churn, you're probably going to sit there and churn for 4 or 5 or 6 months, and that churn is just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. It's going to suck you down. Instead, you take a couple weeks away, a couple weeks, 3 weeks if you need them, and you try not to pressurize yourself in that time. And what happens is the water settles a little bit. You're not churning anymore. And so all of a sudden, you find yourself in 3 weeks or a month, rejuvenated, back to the more positive momentum that you wouldn't have found in 6 months by trying to muscle it out, right? You just wind up injured that way. And so I'm savvy enough to have recognized that. And I've been debating this for probably a month or more now. Should I take a break from making the podcast? I've been at the grindstone, man, for 2 solid years, 100 friggin' episodes. Anybody else in any other industry, television in that 2 years would have produced 40 episodes, 44 episodes, and taken, 5 or 6 month production breaks in the middle, right? And that's how that industry works. Podcasting should probably work that way too, but you get really scared. You get really fearful about, if I disappear for a couple of weeks, I'm going to lose my whole audience. Well, you're not. You're not. Maybe they want a friggin' break too. Maybe they've checked out of what you're talking about, because what you're talking about has been a little bit scraping the barrel, right? Trying to muscle out more episodes. People can sense that. And so all of that to say, it's taken me 43 minutes to say, I'm going to have a little summer vacation, kids. By summer vacation, I mean a vacation in the summer, not a vacation for the summer. I'm just going to take a couple weeks off. That's all. I'm just not going to produce a podcast for a couple of weeks because I need to regenerate. I need to just take a step back and see where it wants to go now. I've got some stuff in my head about what might come next here. Need to noodle that over. I need to take a break. I need to restore my creative juices. And I want to watch some Euros. I want to watch some of the soccer tournament. I got a couple of gigs that are coming along. I'm doing some recording with Lindsay. There's just stuff, and I want to go indulge that stuff. And I want to take just a couple weeks off from producing the podcast so I don't have to think about it. Because it's not as though I just sit down on Monday morning and hit go and then pop it up on Wednesday and that's it. It's like the preparation for the next episode when things are rolling begins on Thursday, the day after episode X is recorded. The next day, I'm on to, okay, what do we do for episode Y? And it's just this constant kind of churn of being in it and trying to produce it. And when that's going well, that's great. A lot of times when things are flowing really well, one episode tips off the next. A lot of times, like they just kind of build on each other. It's a little bit of a red flag when that stops happening. It usually means you're in your head. Usually means you just need to tap out for a couple of weeks. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to not think about the podcast for a couple of weeks because everyone's entitled to a little summer vacation, man. So I'm going to take a couple weeks of vacay. And I feel a certain amount of guilt and shame towards my patrons who are signing up under the presupposition of a weekly episode. Maybe I'll try to drop something on Patreon over the next couple of weeks to satisfy those. Thank you to my new subscribers as well. Thank you, Mr. Cool, for reappearing in my life and joining. I thank you very much for that. I'm going to take a couple weeks off. That's it. I'm just not going to produce a podcast for the next couple weeks of June. Going to go outside. Going to breathe the air. Going to dig around in the dirt. Going to watch some soccer. Going to play a couple of gigs. Going to do some recording. I'm going to rejuvenate. I'm going to get a positive energy going. A positive momentum going. And I'm going to make some decisions on some stuff and then reappear, right? And then hopefully get the flow going again, right? And things will get better. That's what you need to do. If you are struggling creatively, one of the best things you can do is simply take a little break. Give yourself a freaking break, all right? Do not be caught up, especially podcasters, in this kind of myth of the weekly grind. There's a time to grind and there's a time to just relax. So I'm going to take some time to just relax just for a couple weeks. Don't get scared. I'm coming back. It's going to be okay. Just need to have a little summer vacation, okay? Going to do that. And I think that's the healthy and positive thing to do. And it gives you, the listener, a couple of opportunities, okay? Gives you an opportunity to listen to episodes that you haven't heard yet, because I've been banging them out at a rapid clip, man. So maybe you've missed a few. Go back and have a listen if you miss me. The other thing you can do is listen to the John Huff podcast referenced on the Podcast 2024 playlist on Spotify. Having some dissonance about Spotify too, but we don't need to talk about that right now. What we do need to talk about is that list is growing. I don't know, there's like 50 songs on it, probably close to it now, of stuff mostly that's been discovered this year. Those are very current, very fresh songs and great songs, man. I do not put stuff on that playlist that I don't really, really like. I don't talk about stuff on this podcast that I don't really, really like. And so if you have not listened to the playlist, go do it. There is some straight up metal on there. There's some pop metal on there. There's a lot of great singer-songwriter stuff. 90% of it released this year. Okay? And if you haven't checked it out, do. Because A, great music. B, you'll actually have some context for some of the things I say on here. Go check out the playlist. And as of today, there'll be another new entry on it. And I have also struggled to find music that I really like, actually. It's like this whole podcast thing, what I talk about, the music that I talk about, it's like the whole thing is grounds to kind of a halt. And that's important. You recognize things grinding to a halt. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Things aren't flowing, things aren't working, things aren't coming that easily. Is it telling you to change something? You know? And sometimes you just need to take time away to contemplate that. Why have things ground out the way they have? Have we exhausted the supply of what it was I was talking about and we need to go somewhere else? So it is with the music. I listen to tons of new music every week and I hear stuff that I think is cool. Doesn't really grab me by the face. And as I've said before, the stuff that I talk about needs to grab me by the face. And so as a parting gift before my little vacation, I'm giving you a brand new song by an Australian artist called Rowena Wise. And the algorithm served this one up to me, man. Rowena's song, Indifferent. From her recently released album, Senseless Acts of Beauty. Rowena Wise, Indifferent. And it's one of those ones, it fits very comfortably in the vein of Sarah Harmer, who we all know I love. And it fits in with Maggie Rogers. All right, I've done a lot of singer-songwriter stuff on this show. It's kind of fun because you tend to get one of two things when I recommend music here. You either get a hair metal revival song, Issa, Armed and Dangerous, or you get a singer-songwriter tune. Very, very different things. Once in a while, a cool indie song like that Everlet song, WYG, which I still really love. Here we have Rowena Wise from Australia with just one of these. It's a breakup song. It's a little bit of a tear in your eye song, and it's sad, and it's melancholy, and it's mournful, and it's really, really pretty and beautiful. And I hear a lot of pretty and beautiful songs, and I can't really calculate why it is some grab you and some don't. But this song, Indifferent by Rowena Wise, grabbed me. Just did. It's got the right chord progression. It's got the right production. It's got a very understated vocal on it. And it's a character, maybe it's her, maybe it's not, just talking about, I think, running across somebody that they used to be in a relationship with and how they're kind of indifferent about it now. And how sad that is. How sad that is. I recall once in one of my, I was about to say failed novels, but we'll just say unpublished novels, where a couple had broken up and, it's 6 or 8 months later. And the man from the relationship is contemplating this idea that if he runs into his ex, he doesn't know what to call her anymore because he hasn't used her real name since about 2 dates in, right? He's had a pet name or a nickname for her. And it's like, it blows my mind that I might run into her and not know what to call her because her real name does not come naturally to my lips, right? Her pet name does, but I can't call her that anymore. We don't have that level of intimacy. And so it is, I think, with the characters in Rowena Wise's song Indifferent. It's like they run across each other and it's like, I don't know how to, I don't know, I don't care anymore. And it's a really sad song, but it's a really pretty song and a really beautiful song. And it's one of those ones that in my case, especially in this somewhat vulnerable state of mind I'm in these days, makes you a little bit misty. You know, it's melancholy and it pulls you into that sort of kind of just sad emotion. It's a really, really pretty song. Really beautiful song. Rowena Wise from Australia. Indifferent. And I think you should check that out. It is going on the playlist. I really, really like that one. There's some great stuff on the playlist, man. Check it the F out. You'll find some music that you haven't listened to before on there. Some of it you're going to really, really like, okay? Everything on there, especially the stuff from the past year, like the new stuff that I talk about, is on there because I love it. And one of the ways to stay young is to discover new music. So do that, okay? Check it out. Got 52 minutes of an episode with nothing to say. How about that? Not bad, eh? Maybe there's still a spark, you know? Maybe there's still a fire inside. I'm going to take a couple weeks to fan that flame, and we'll come back and see how things look from that perspective. In the meantime, please do take care of yourselves. Take a few minutes, man. Slow down. Get quiet. You know, if you're struggling a bit creatively, step back. There's nothing wrong with stepping back. In fact, it's the thing you should do. Take a friggin' break. It's why we have vacation. That's what it's supposed to be. So take it. Take a few minutes. Take a few weeks, whatever. Just step back, get quiet, refill that cup, man. And if the cup is full, then go, cat, go. Strike while the iron is hot. But if it's cooled off, chill out, man. Take a step back, stoke it, and then come back ready to go. But trust your instincts on this. And do not fall into the trap of this guilt or this pressure to keep producing, because a lot of the times what you're producing is not going to be any good and it's just going to make you feel worse. Step back, tap the conduit, plug back into your instincts and your intuition, and then let it flow, kids. So we'll let it flow in a couple weeks. In the meantime, thank you ever so much for listening. 2 solid years of episodes. Thanks for hanging. We'll be back. It's all good. Gonna put my face in the freaking sun, get some vitamin D, come back and do the thing, all right? So take care, kids. Go listen to the playlist. I'll be back in a couple weeks. Until then, remember, good things happen when you put yourself out there, and I'll check you later. And I will. Yeah.
If we meet again one day, I'll be indifferent and you'll be the same. Moving mountains, babe, just to get your